Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide and the originator of Trinity Energy Progression. This is a challenging topic. This week's is a challenging topic to sort of like get into because there's so many different ways that we can get into it. So I'm sort of like, where do I start? Where do I start? And it might just be to start where you might say, well, what are you talking about when I talk about being unaligned and misaligned and non-harmonized or whatever in our realities, even when we have a very different experience out there. Like when we feel very connected, those of us who have been on active spiritual journeys, who are committed to expanding our consciousness, and then we get sort of in this place of being stuck, or it's clumpy, or we still have sickness and we have injury and just unhappiness in our lives. And we have written it off. Many times we've written it off to, oh, it's just part of me serving, it's all this kind of stuff. Now I can talk about that whole idea for a show in itself. But really, what has been coming up, and this is such a huge thing, is for us to start looking at where we are not being in harmony with our remembered consciousness. So what I mean by that is we are expanding our remembrance. We're allowing, good morning, Laurel. We're allowing more remembrance in terms of like multidimensional consciousness, in terms of, holographic multiverse, and we have all these experiences. And the more we commit to this consciousness, the more we have these experiences in these other parts of the multiverse, right? So, for example, right now, many of us are having very, very vivid dream states, and or very, very deep ones that they don't remember anything. And so it can be, and to me, my experience has been that more and more I've been doing all this traveling and work with other people out there in that other set of dimensions I go to in the dream state. And it's almost becoming more and more concrete. And then this reality becomes less and less concrete and more of just a fluid commercial, so to speak. And so many of you just say, oh, well, that's just a dream. It's like whatever, but it's actually not. It's our shifting balance of our full consciousness, where this is such a small speck of our consciousness here in our physical bodies in this like set of dimensions here on Earth. So, and then there's just so much discussion about what's individual, what's wholeness. Is there wholeness within the individual, and then wholeness within collectives, and then it's concentrically, large until it's all encompassing. So we can just talk about that. There's just so much. And so there's so many new, not new, but expanded ideas coming out there on what things mean, how they connect together. We're seeing a lot of different ways in higher consciousness of how dots are connected. So one of the things that I was guided to talk about today, because I have many ways I can go with this. There are many discussions I can have just in very specific areas. But my guidance was to talk about just this in general, is as we start to embrace that remembrance, right, and connecting those larger dots from higher consciousness and seeing the bigger picture and seeing how every individual journey is connected to the collective journey, and it's all the same, it's just a different representation. We then so we see it and we know it, and people talk about it, and we read about it, and we write about it, and all this kind of stuff. And yet, then we go home, we do our chores, we, have our marriages, our partnerships, our solitude. We fill roles that we have been brought up to fill, and it's almost like we keep elements separate. So we talk a lot about how I talk a lot about how it's so important to us. It's challenging for me to stay in words here because I'm staying in this higher level of seeing right now. So I'm waiting for the words, and hopefully it doesn't just float away. So you just can connect in energetically. But we talk about things like like keeping, like that. It's not, spirituality is not a box in our lives. That the spirituality and awareness is actually something to filter through and encompass all of it, all of our experiences, because this is all just a holographic representation of something we've created for a set of lessons we've chosen to create. So in doing so, when we created the earth, we've created the evolutions and the way that we have, cycled around, that we have evolved, that we've crashed, that we've started again and evolved again, and then we've crashed again. And there's been multiple times. And every time we set this plethora of rules and guidelines and laws, things that we are, even like the laws of physics and things like that, that we agree collectively to abide by as part of the experience here. So my understanding is, as many of us, is that it's the last cycle around where we're repeating certain lessons in separation, duality, and density in this particular set of dimensions. And actually, there's a bunch of stuff shifting across the multiverse. So it's not just here. But I'm talking specifically right now about the whole Earth experience and experiment. And so as we are doing that, we see it, we feel it, we know it, we talk it. We write about it. We teach about it. We do classes about it, right? And yet we still, we're finding more and more bumps along the road. And many come to me, and many conversations I have are centered around like, oh, well, I don't understand, like all this is great, but then this is really bumpy. Like this is really, this is really fabulous. And then this is really, disappointing, or I can't seem to get past it. I have this sickness, I have this injury, I have this chronic illness, I have this, I have that, all that kind of stuff. So we do that, and we go, well, what do I do? Good morning, Tristan. Yeah. So we start to really, then we start to puzzle, and then we start to get into, then what happens is we start to focus on each of those things that we feel like are not flowing, right? So like eventually at first it's like what's wrong, then it's really what's not in flow. Okay. So we start looking at that, and then we get very individualized, and we're like, okay, so how do I approach this? How do I change this? So the challenge is this, and I'm trying to convey this in words because we are sort of limited in this discussion yet. But what we're doing, though, is that perpetuates the limitations, is that we are still approaching things from a 3D mindset, from managing things here in very separate, duality-based, dense mindset, because the mind and the ego have gotten control and managed this part of our consciousness as when we incarnate here, and that includes all the dimensions that are here, right? So what happens, though, is the mind now has this set this set number of habits, these set things that we've said, okay, I'm going to program myself in my identity, because that's what the ego has been doing, right, for eons, what it is I'm supposed to do, what it is that I'm supposed to do to look like a human, to act like a human, to be human, to have human relationships, to value myself based on human guidelines and valuations. I'm thinking it's like the 5-star scale, but and that's what we have built in, and we pass that down, right? Generation to generation. And we have agreed to it to some degree. So here's the thing. As we have now agreed to a higher living and higher consciousness, and bringing in more consciousness and expanding and holding a different set of vibrations, then it's time for us to also change the thought process and the ego's roles as we are here, right? and our habits, because the habits are the biggest things that hold us back. So we say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to be this spiritual guru and I'm going to teach classes and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go home and I'm going to, be a mother, be a father, be a spouse, be a significant other. I'm going to do this. I'm going to be a dutiful child. And I'm going to, or I'm going to do this in my job. I'm going to go to this job, but then I'm like, and I separate all this in my mind. I'm going to have this relationship. I value myself based on what relationships I create and how I create them. Like there's all these different things that we have so ingrained in their habits, and they're very managed by the 3D, from the 3D. What happens though is as we are gaining our remembrance and expanding our consciousness, we know more and more, we remember more and more of our higher self, right? And the higher consciousness and the collective and everything else. And yet we're still like it's almost like the mind and the ego are digging their heels in and saying, no, but these are the habits. These are the things that we agreed to. These are the rules. And this is how we're going to continue on, right? So this is how I'm going to continue on my life. So I will do the spirituality as long as I can have this kind of relationship. Or I do this with the expectation that I'm going to have this kind of relationship or this kind of like picture, or this will provide for me. And when I say that I believe the universe provides, this is what I believe it provides. And again, then we start putting things in boxes, right? So yeah, this is pretty obtuse stuff, but it's not, because it's very, very specific. And like I said, there's like, this touches every part of our lives. It touches how we eat. It touches the relationships we get into, right? It touches what we perceive to be expected relationships, right? So I've had so much come in about twin flames that I've been waiting for so long, about twin flame, this bigger picture stuff that finally came in. And I have like, I probably have an entire workshop to do on that, right? And I don't even want to try to talk about it in a half hour today, because I'm already almost halfway through and I haven't even really sort of gotten into the specifics, but it's like soulmates and, marital relationships and what's that supposed to look like and what's our fulfillment supposed to look like. And we have all these things, and we are so like ingrained in valuing ourselves based on those things that we say, okay, so if I become really spiritual and I commit myself to my spirituality and I commit myself to, meditating and doing energy work and I do yoga and I do this and I do that, then I expect that I'm supposed to have some like banger relationship, like that really awesome relationship with somebody, right? A significant other, because guess what? There's an old habit, the 3D, saying I am not complete unless I have somebody else in my life, right? So I see a lot of people who do this kind of work that's like, they'll be like, oh, well, this is all great, but I'm really so disappointed because I haven't been able to find that significant other. And I'm like, why are you disappointed? If you're happy with all this other stuff, then are you just fooling yourself and telling yourself, oh, this is what it should look like? Is this just another form of saying, okay, so instead of saying, oh, the corporate job, the 2.5 kids, the marriage and the white picket fence, or what's going to make me happy, maybe it's, oh, well, I can be a good person by being spiritual and like do all this stuff, and that proves that I'm worthy. So that means that proves for me that I'm worthy to have a relationship. But then that's still externalizing our value, instead of saying, I'm already happy within myself. I'm fulfilled as I am, right? So I don't need the relationship. And if I choose to have a relationship, if I choose to stay in a day-to-day with somebody else and in a place of love, unconditional love and acceptance, I am going, like, the difference is this. What's important for us to start doing is to say things like, if I'm going to do that, then I'm going to allow it to be in a place that it does not sacrifice my own unconditional self-love, that it does not sacrifice, that I don't sacrifice what it is that I came here to fulfill in my divine embodiment. And it's not going to be a sacrifice of my wholeness. It's just going to be walking the path next to each other and honoring each other's journey in love and joy. And yes, sharing some stuff, but not needing to share stuff. Needing is the key point, right? We're so used to need, and needing is this entire existence of lack that we have here in the 3D, and part of the effort, and not the effort, the experience of expanded consciousness is getting to this place of of knowing that we are complete as we are, and that there is no need for anything else. And if we feel like we need something, then it's important. Then we need to look inside. Then it's important to look in the mirror, right? Because part of all of this reality that we create is really the recognition of looking at ourselves in the mirror, right? So some of the stuff that, that comes in is like, what's happening is, as we are living in a much more conscious state, and guidance pushes in on us to say, yeah, throw away this life, throw away this relationship, throw away this job, because these things don't work for us when we want to exist 100% in this place, right? In this fulfillment. And that's like this clunky part that many people get upset about, because they're like, oh, well, this is falling away. I'm losing my house. I'm losing my relationship. I'm losing my job. I lost this. I lost that. Well, but the thing is, it was important to let go of. And I've spoken of this before, but the other thing that we are really stuck in as we're seeing things and remembering things, and we talk about like having soul agreements, and we talk about from those agreements, these expectations, what we are doing is like, and then we build a picture around what those expectations are supposed to be. Then we are continuing and perpetuating management at the 3D, very separate and dense level, instead of higher consciousness. So no matter how high a consciousness that we're functioning at, we are then still operating at a very low level of consciousness and a high level of density. So important for us is to listen to guidance without the translation, to say, okay, and my biggest thing for the past several months has been stepping back and saying, so what am I to do about this? What am I, if I see this and I understand it, and something seems to be like frictional, right? I step back and say, so what is there for me to do? Not what do I need to do, because that's ego-based. What haven't I done? Blah, 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 blah. What has to be done? No, it's what is there for me to do, with the implication of, for it to fit in higher consciousness and my higher consciousness, my commitment to higher consciousness existence. And so the really important part of that is to be completely fluid to what the guidance says, because as soon as we start to resist and say, oh, okay, well, I'll do this to satisfy what I believe is this, but I'm not going to change this. This is my precious, right? That's egoic, and that's still very low, very low density, very separate. And there's nothing, it's not that it's wrong, it's that it's important for us, if we're shifting everything, it's for us to shift into this more connectedness place, to see all that, to be able to see it, and then to change it and shift it in a place of connectedness and wholeness, and from a higher consciousness, and realizing from a very high consciousness, we are managing this entire existence. And so if we try to micromanage from the ant level all the time, then we will continue to anchor in our realities at ant levels all the time as we're incarnate here. And we will crash again and again and cycle again and again. And the key is to break free of that. And part of the breaking free is to break free of what we have programmed ourselves so deeply to follow, to continue that perpetuation. So one of the many things that I've talked about many times, not just here, but also in my other podcast, Ascended World, with my friend Sarah, is the acceptance of the darkness. And the light is just a part of duality, just as much as the darkness. That it's really wholeness for us to embrace and remember, for us to really be able to embody that fulfillment and shift, right? Another thing is to look at our latent expectations on everything. One of the things that, like I said, that's been really big, that's been coming in, is stuff about twin flames, because there's so many misnomers out there. And I know I've been working with many for years about this. I have very personal experiences about it. And I also have helped a lot of people with it, but I've always been waiting for this answer of like some more clarity from like a different level of consciousness. And really what this is, and it's not just twin flames, but it's soulmates, it's soul agreements and things like that. We at some level even come in here with the soul agreements in the back of our minds, knowing that, okay, I promised this, I promised that. And when we so here's the key, when we promise something, where were we? Where that soul agreement happened? And what was the expectation that I built around that? And the story I built around that to have to follow, right? Because that will also keep me very low vibration, not low vibration, just very dense and separate and limited. That's the word I was looking for. So here's the thing. When we get into relationships, like we expect, oh, that's supposed to be forever. Marriage is supposed to be forever. My goal is to get married or find the person that my soulmate that's going to be, my forever person and whatever. But when we come to that place and we start to commit to that wholeness within ourselves and that unconditional love within ourselves, then it's okay. It's always okay, but we are better at allowing ourselves to say, okay, so what really does serve me? Do I really want to be in a marriage? And there are many people I've worked with who are ready to move on from a marriage, and it wasn't particularly terrible, but it also wasn't particularly attending to their, highest realization. And something from their higher self was saying that sometimes that's the most challenging kind of like breakup to do in this kind of reality, in this kind of, in this level of reality, because there's all these expectations and all these external valuations that we don't want people to judge us. And we're like, oh, well, if I left, like, what will people think? Or I'm failing, or this is good enough because I'm only worthy enough to have this kind of relationship. Or I have to carry this out this way. I have to follow this, I have to follow this pattern. I have to do what my parents did. And so there's so much that we break. And if, like what culture will look at me as, or I'll be a single mom, or I'll fail my kids, and then I'll feel guilty about that. There's so many of these things that these scripts that run in our heads because we're breaking these old patterns and these old roles, right? I know many people now who have long-term relationships that are very unique to them. They don't live in the same state. They don't even live in the same state. They only see each other every once in a while. They have their own separate lives. There's just many different unique situations. All kinds of shifting. And I know many people who have listened to the guidance, even though from cultural standpoint of saying, well, what's the matter? It's not like you're fighting all the time. It's not like you're being, abused or anything else. But people, but the higher self is saying, yeah, it's time for us to move on because this is limiting us, because the ego is attending to expectations that you believe is making you more worthy. Right. So you stay in a relationship and it's like, well, you follow these rules, or you only go so far, or you don't do certain things because you at some level don't want to upset your spouse. You don't want to rock the cart. Right. Or, you don't want to fail your kids or feel like you're a failure as a parent. Like there's all that kind of stuff. Well, that's all very ego and dense. Because when we commit ourselves to that wholeness and unconditional love, yes, things will shake and they will tremble and they will fall away and they will change. And I guarantee you that. And I will also guarantee that in the long run, they will be so much better for the authenticity. Because when you then commit to that self-love and you commit to that being there in a higher consciousness and listening to guidance purely and connecting with those from a place of consciousness and not from obligation, then it's much more of a pure connection. And there's no expectation. There's no, you have to be with me every day. It's funny. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was having a problem with somebody else who said, well, with my friends, like, this is how I have to have my friendships. And, I have to have you in my every day and I have to do this and we have to do that. And, my friend was saying, yeah, but that's not how I do relationships anymore. Like, and yes, I love you and I really honor you and cherish you as part of my reality. But I also don't feel like we need to be in every day. Like, we don't need to be in every day with each other. That's a higher consciousness kind of existence. I was very fortunate to have set things up to have had that kind of connection with my twin flame growing up and everything else, and not needing to be in every day, but yet being connected in a different place, like by talking instead of being in everyday life. And I was, by that vibration, I realized I was taught how to do that in a much easier way. So I have people who I'm very, very close to all over the world, all over the place. And I don't feel the need that, like, it doesn't make me a better friend or make them better friends or less better friends just because they're here or not here. But we get very stuck in that, and how close we are to somebody by how much we do with them versus how much we're connected with them, right? So that's a different way of starting to look at the way we connect with others. And to say, and you know what, this is one of the beautiful things of the internet and connectability, is the ability to be connected, to stay connected, to appease the mind, right, in a way that the mind says, oh, well, we've connected because we've talked or we've chatted or we've texted or whatever. But then the next step beyond that is knowing we're always connected, no matter what. Like, I cannot see, there are people I know who I cannot talk to or see for 8, 9, 10 months, a year. And then all of a sudden I just get this ping, oh, it's time to see so-and-so. It's time to reach out to so-and-so. And then we get together and it's like we never left each other's presence. And it's beautiful because there's no expectations. There's just simple joy in being together and sharing our vibration. And that's a much more authentic way for us to connect. And it's not just a certain kind of relationship. These are all kinds of relationships. And so sometimes we have periods of time where we're much closer with one person, or we're very much more in the day-to-day with one individual, and then it changes, and then we're not. But it doesn't mean that the relationship changes. It just means that the pattern or the habits of the relationship changes, but the connection always stays the same. And when we start to really trust that true connection and know that it's always there, then we don't have to like weigh ourselves down with this day-to-day of, I have to be in this person's reality. We have to talk this many times. We have to text this many times. It's so interesting how so much of our society has become obsessed with, immediate response to texting and emails and all that kind of stuff. And yet and yet we have become more and more disconnected in many ways than ever. So, these are the things, like, and that has to do with what? Expectations of, how busy you are, or how many people are reaching out to you means how important you are, or how good you are, or whatever, right? Or how needed you are. When we get to a place of trusting connection and knowing connection, then we don't have to prove it. We don't have to prove our value by how we're connected. And so we can step away from the phone. I do it all the time. Like, I'll leave my phone someplace and I can't find it, and I'll be like, okay, whatever, I'm just doing my stuff. And I have a business. So the funny thing is, luckily I have my calendar on my computer and my phone, so I can check what I'm doing. But there are days, Sundays, like weekends off, and I'm away from my phone for hours. And not even in touch. Many people know that if they don't hear from me, they know that when I'm so guided, I'll get back to you. And it's not that there's any judgment with that, but these are different ways of connecting and starting to incorporate higher consciousness into what we are living day to day. And so then what happens is, when we stop weighing ourselves down with what we believe are obligations and things that we have to do, like, oh, I have to see so-and-so, or I have to see so-and-so, and it's time for me to, like, blah, 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 and I have to do this for this person, and I have to do this for this person, and I have no time left for myself, right? So when we stop that and we say, you know what, I honor everyone's journey, and if I am so guided, I will step up and do this, and if I am not, then I'm not, it frees up so much energy for us then to really live and exist in our expanded consciousness, and stay there and stay in the habit of it, and then explore even more, including like relationships and the nature of relationships, even even when we're in relationships, there's a different way to connect in trust and love, and honoring each other's journey without impeding on it. Like, we have this really big thing culturally, and I think this is mostly around the world, that when we're married, we have to abide by making our spouse happy. So when I have couples come in to see me, one of the first things I do is split them up, and I see them separately, because you're never 100% honest in front of the person you love, no matter how close you are, for various reasons. But when I see them, the first thing I say is, well, what makes you happy? And you can't tell me that it's making your spouse or your kids happy. What allows, and it's not what makes you happy, because nothing outside of you actually does make you happy. It's whether you allow your happiness. What helps you, help support allowing your happiness to be embodied. That's a very different energy than what makes you happy. It feels so much more expansive, right? And when we get into the habit, so the first thing is to change our habit to say, okay, what is it in my experience? And when somebody comes in, they say they think they're on the verge of breaking up, one of the first things I say is, okay, well, let's look at your happiness first, and not how that person does or doesn't make you happy, but where you are in your own happiness. And I can't tell you how many times I've been with somebody or working with somebody who says to me, I don't know, I have no idea what would just allow me to be happy without me making somebody else happy. Because we have it so ingrained and it's so habitualized, right? So part of the habit to change in a higher consciousness is getting to this place of embodying our happiness, embodying our bliss, because that is our natural state, is this bliss and unconditional love, right? So the more we allow ourselves to embody it, that means the more we pull out these partitions that say I have to and I can't and all that kind of stuff, then the more then we can emanate it and share it with others, and that vibration allows others to do that for themselves as well. And then the nature of the way we connect with other people is completely different. And that's how we start to embody higher consciousness and how we start to live it. That's one of the very basic things. And there's so many different ways of doing that. And it's like, another thing is, managing from much higher consciousness than micromanaging from here. Many people do vision boards and stuff like that. And I've never really gotten to that, because unless I've been so guided, but most of the time it's, okay, you know what the big picture is, right? And the more we really exist in higher consciousness and know that nothing outside of me is going to make me happy, right? That goes back to a very basic thing. And so when I commit to that, embodying that happiness and embodying my divine bliss and all that kind of stuff, so what is it from that being, is it for me to create? Because everything that I create from that will be golden. And there'll be almost no effort in creation, because it'll all just sort of conspire to come together for me. But these are a few of very many different things. So this week, what I want you to do, like I said, I can talk about this for hours and hours. There's so many different areas, and I'm just starting to sort of get into the detail of it. But for this week, what I want you to do is look at in your life where you limit yourself. And we don't look at it as limiting ourselves, because we think, oh, because I love this person, I have to make them happy. And so I'm going to not do this because they'll be cranky if I do this. Well, yeah, those are the things to start looking at and say, okay, so let me shift that to, how about just looking in the mirror and saying, so what is it in my life that allows me to embody my happiness and to really embody my joy and my passion? And allow that more. Like, commit to allowing that, 20% more this week. Or even if you don't know what consciously that is, then explore and say, okay, well, then let me try some new things, or things that I'm going to be pulled to that I haven't tried before. And that starts to really like churn things around and shake things up. And also then start looking at your relationships and the nature of them, and what, just in the simple way of when you're interacting with somebody, does it feel heavy or does it feel light? Do you look forward to the interaction, or do you actually, do you feel like, oh, I got to talk to this person, but, I got to talk to them? Because those are the first signs of things. Okay, well, these are unaligned. And no matter how conscious we are, if we stay in these roles and these boxes, it will hold us down and limit us. So it's time to start shifting them. So we're going to talk more about that next week. There's a lot. I think there's probably going to be several weeks of this. But start with that this week, and ask your guidance. Depending on where you are, you can just step in and say, okay, so what is there for me to change? And be open. I always tell people, like, my default setting is, I have an open heart and allow all possibilities in the creation of my intended, in the manifestation of my intended creations. And I commit myself to that. So I don't want to nix anything that comes up as a possibility in my consciousness. I might write it down in my journal and say, okay, so if I allowed this, what would this look like? But the thing is, we keep on talking stuff, like we'll say, oh, I can't do this. I can do this, but I can't do this. But what if you just took a moment and said, well, what if I could do this? What if I did do this? What if I allowed this? What would that look like? So do that kind of exercise with yourself this week, and then we'll continue on next week. There's a whole lot to discuss. So thank you for joining me. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off with this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.